So Canada and Mexico just seized the World Cup, not figuratively, not symbolically, not as a negotiating tactic or a diplomatic gesture. FIFA has officially redistributed the majority of 2026 World Cup matches from American venues to Canadian and Mexican host cities, stripping the United States of the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the third-place match, the final, and 37 of the 60 matches it was originally awarded, the most anticipated sporting event on earth. An event the United States spent years and billions of dollars preparing to host, an event that 11 American cities had built infrastructure around, hired staff for, committed hotel blocks to, and projected $39 billion in economic impact from, is now happening next door in Toronto, in Vancouver, in Edmonton, in Mexico City, in Guadalajara, in Monterrey. The American stadiums that were renovated, upgraded, and prepared for the biggest party in the history of American sports are going to sit half empty, hosting Tuesday afternoon group stage matches between teams most American fans have never heard of, while 150,000 Canadian and Mexican fans filled their stadiums for the knockout rounds, the semifinals, and the final that were supposed to be America's. FIFA's official statement cited insurmountable diplomatic and security concerns arising from the current state of relations between co-host nations. The first time in the 104-year history of the World Cup that a host nation has had matches redistributed for political reasons. The most powerful country on earth just lost a soccer tournament. Not because it can't play, because it can't cooperate with its neighbors. Warren Buffett called it the most expensive lesson in soft power economics ever delivered to a nation, and said the World Cup loss reveals something about trade wars that no economic model captures. You can calculate what tariffs cost. You can project the cost of a supply chain disruption. You cannot calculate the cost of becoming the country that can't cooperate with its neighbors well enough to host a soccer tournament. But the World Cup just gave us the number, and the number is $39 billion. And the real cost, the reputational cost, the soft power cost, the cost to America's image as a place the world wants to come to is multiples of that. But the line that captured the absurdity and the tragedy in a single breath, the line that sports journalists, trade analysts, and late-night hosts are all quoting for entirely different reasons, is what Carney said when asked if Canada was prepared to host the additional matches. 10 words delivered with a warmth that made them more devastating than any confrontation could have been. Good neighbors get invited to the party, great neighbors throw it. When you understand what the 2026 World Cup was supposed to look like for the United States, why the trade war made nation hosting impossible, how FIFA redistributed the matches, what the loss means for 11 American cities that spent billions preparing, what Buffett said about the economics of being uninvitable, and why the empty American stadiums playing on split screen next to packed Canadian and Mexican ones is the most politically dangerous image of the entire trade war. You'll understand why this isn't just a sporting event. It's the moment the trade war stopped being a policy debate and became a feeling. The feeling of watching the biggest party in the world happen in someone else's house. Hit subscribe, because the World Cup is the most watched event in human history, and the United States just lost it to the trade war. Let me take you back to what this was supposed to look like, because the scale of what was lost only makes sense when you understand the scale of what was promised. The 2026 FIFA World Cup was awarded as a joint bid to the United States, Canada, and Mexico. United 2026, the first World Cup expanded to 48 teams and 80 total matches, the largest tournament in the competition's history. The United States was allocated 60 of those 80 matches, the vast majority of the tournament, including every knockout stage game from the round of 16 onward, the quarterfinals, the semifinals, the third-place match, and the final, the single most watched sporting event on earth. Projected at over 2 billion viewers, awarded to Menifee Stadium in East Rutherford, New Jersey. Canada received 10 group stage matches split between Toronto, Vancouver, and Edmonton. Mexico received 10 split between Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. The American hosting was the centerpiece, the crown jewels of the tournament in American stadiums, with 11 host cities spanning the country. In New York and New Jersey at Menifee, Los Angeles at SoFi Stadium, Dallas at AT&T Stadium, Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Houston at NRG Stadium, Philadelphia at Lincoln Financial Field, Miami at Hard Rock Stadium, Seattle at Lumen Field, San Francisco Bay Area at Levi Stadium, Boston at Gillette Stadium, and Kansas City at Arrowhead Stadium. The projected economic impact across those 11 cities was $39 billion. Direct spending on tickets, hotels, food, and transportation, indirect spending on infrastructure, employment, and media, and the multiplier effect of money circulating through local economies. The largest single event economic impact in American sports history, larger than the Super Bowl, larger than the Olympics, larger than anything the American tourism and hospitality industry had ever planned for. The preparation was already well underway. Stadium renovations costing hundreds of millions, transportation infrastructure upgrades, security systems, broadcasting, installations, hotel commitments, locked in at World Cup premium pricing years in advance, fan zones planned in city centers from Times Square to the Las Vegas Strip, volunteer programs with hundreds of thousands of enrolls, sponsorship activations designed around American host cities, and the cultural significance that no dollar figure captures. The United States hosting the World Cup final, 2 billion people watching the trophy lifted in an American stadium, was supposed to be a moment of global celebration. The world coming to America, America welcoming the world, the soft power broadcast of a lifetime. And then the trade war killed it, not with a single blow, with a cascading series of failures that made the most complex sporting event in history operationally impossible between nations that could no longer operate together. The U.S.-Canada diplomatic severance, the first in the 8-year history of the bilateral relationship, was the first domino. FIFA's operational requirements for a tri-nation World Cup demand constant, intensive, sustained cooperation between host nations, shared security protocols for fan movement between host countries, coordinated transportation logistics for teams, officials, media, and the hundreds of thousands of fans who travel between venues during a tournament, joint broadcasting infrastructure, synchronized customs and visa processing so that a fan with a ticket to a match in Toronto on Tuesday and a match in Philadelphia on Thursday can cross the border without a 3-day bureaucratic ordeal. When diplomatic relations were severed, every one of those coordination mechanisms ceased to function. There was no bilateral communication channel for security coordination, no framework for joint customs processing, no mechanism for the basic logistical cooperation that moving millions of people between two countries during a month-long event requires. FIFA's independent security assessment, conducted by a consultancy that has evaluated every World Cup since 2006, concluded that the U.S.-Canada border situation created in their language unacceptable risk profiles for spectator movement between co-host nations and recommended either full restoration of diplomatic relations or significant restructuring of the match allocation to minimize cross-border spectator flows. The U.S.-Mexico relationship, while not severed to the same degree, had deteriorated under the sustained pressure of tariffs, immigration confrontations, and public hostility to a point where Mexican cooperation with a U.S. sea-centric tournament was domestically untenable. Mexico's government faced intense public pressure to distance itself from any arrangement that appeared to benefit the United States. While the U.S. imposed punitive economic policies on Mexico, Mexican legislators publicly stated that facilitating American World Cup revenue while American tariffs damaged Mexican industry would be an act of political self-destruction. Meanwhile, Canada and Mexico, united by the shared experience of American economic aggression, had deepened their own bilateral relationship throughout the trade war, signing cooperation frameworks that specifically included cultural and sporting event coordination. When the World Cup hosting crisis emerged, Canada and Mexico were already positioned to work together seamlessly. The irony was structural. The trade war had destroyed the U.S. relationship with both neighbors, while simultaneously strengthening the relationship between those neighbors. FIFA's calculation was operational, not political. A tri-nation tournament where 2 of the 3 bilateral relationships between co-hosts have collapsed is not a tri-nation tournament. It is three separate events sharing a logo. FIFA's operational board concluded that redistributing matches to maintain a functional two-nation hosting arrangement, Canada and Mexico, which could cooperate with a minimized American role, was the only path to delivering a tournament that met the quality, safety, and broadcast standards that FIFA's commercial partners and global audience required. Is greater than. And then FIFA announced the restructuring, and the numbers told the story of who won and who lost. The official announcement was delivered at FIFA headquarters in Zurich, a 4-0 minute presentation by the Secretary General that was broadcast live and watched by an estimated 800 million people, making it one of the most viewed administrative announcements in sports history. The new allocation, Canada expanded from 10 matches to 29, including 2 quarterfinals, 1 semifinal, and the third-place match. Toronto's field upgraded to knockout round venue status with temporary capacity expansion to 55,000. Vancouver's BC Place in Edmonton's Commonwealth Stadium absorbing additional group stage and round of 16 matches. Mexico expanded from 10 matches to 28, including 2 quarterfinals, 1 semifinal, and the final. Mexico City's Estadio Azteca, the only stadium in the world that has hosted 2 World Cup finals in 1970 and 1986, was awarded the 2026 final, making it the first and only venue in history to host 3. That detail alone became one of the most discussed facts in global sports, a stadium becoming the permanent spiritual home of the World Cup's defining moment, not because of Mexican lobbying, but because American self-destruction created the opening. Guadalajara and Monterrey absorbed the remaining matches. The United States was reduced from 60 matches to 13 group stage matches, the earliest round, lowest viewership, lowest ticket price, lowest economic impact games in the tournament. No knockout rounds, no semifinals, no final. The 11 original host cities reduced to 5 venues hosting early round games featuring the tournament's lowest profile matchups. The economic redistribution was proportional and devastating. American host cities, originally projected to capture $39 billion in World Cup economic activity, were now projected to capture between $4 and $5 billion, a loss of approximately $34 billion. Canadian host cities were projected to gain $12 to $14 billion. Mexican host cities were projected to gain $16 to $18 billion. The money didn't disappear. It moved across both borders to the countries the trade war was designed to punish. And then the losses hit the cities, not as revised projections on a spreadsheet, as cancellations. New York and New Jersey had bet everything on the final. Metaface Stadium had completed $320 million in renovations specifically for the World Cup, upgraded seating, expanded concourse infrastructure, new broadcast facilities, enhanced security systems. The New York and New Jersey metropolitan area had projected $8.7 billion in total economic impact from hosting multiple knockout matches in the final, the largest single-event economic projection in the region's history. Hotels across northern New Jersey and Manhattan had committed room blocks at World Cup premium rates 300 to 400% above normal pricing for the final week of the tournament. Restaurants, bars, entertainment venues, and retailers across the metro area had built revenue projections, staffing plans, and inventory commitments around World Cup traffic. The Times Square fan zone, designed as the largest public viewing area in World Cup history, capable of hosting 200,000 fans for the final, had been in planning for 2 years and had already committed $60 million in infrastructure and sponsorship agreements. All of it, the renovations, the hotels, the restaurants, the fan zone, the staffing, the inventory, was built for a final that is now happening in Mexico City. Matif Stadium will host 2 group stage matches in the tournament's first week. Estimated economic impact, a fraction of what was projected. The $320 million in renovations spent, the return on that investment gone. Dallas had planned to host a semifinal at AT&T Stadium, the largest enclosed venue in World Cup history. The state of Texas and the city of Dallas had committed significant public funds to transportation upgrades, security infrastructure, and a tourism marketing campaign specifically designed around the World Cup semifinal as a global branding event, now hosting 2 group stage matches. Miami's Hard Rock Stadium was positioned to be the crossover venue, the place where South Florida's massive Latin American diaspora community would converge with the World Cup's global Latin American fan base to create the most culturally electric atmosphere of any host city. Those fans, the spending, the energy, the cultural moment, are going to Guadalajara and Mexico City instead. Los Angeles, Atlanta, Houston, Philadelphia, Seattle, San Francisco, Boston, Kansas City. Every host city carries its own version of the same story. Infrastructure built, commitments made, revenue projected, and the event that was supposed to justify all of it has been redistributed to other countries. Small businesses, the restaurants and bars that planned World Cup viewing events, the hotels that priced rooms at World Cup premiums, the street vendors who stocked inventory, the Uber and Lyft drivers who planned around surge pricing, the event staff agencies that hired and trained thousands of temporary workers face a revenue gap that many will not survive. The volunteer dimension captures something that economics don't. Over 400,000 Americans had signed up to volunteer at World Cup venues in their cities. 400,000 people who organized their summers around the tournament, who completed training programs, who bought commemorative uniforms, who planned to be part of something historic. They have nothing to volunteer for. The party was canceled. The preparations remain. And then the tournament started, and the images told the story more brutally than any economic report ever could. The split screen became the defining visual 2026 World Cup and of the trade war itself. On one side of the screen, Estadio Esta, 105,000 fans in full voice for a quarterfinal, the stadium shaking with the energy that only a World Cup knockout match in Latin America can produce. On the other side, MetLife Stadium, 38,000 fans scattered across an 82,000-seat venue for a group stage match between two nations whose combined global fan base could not fill the lower bowl. The image was broadcast to 5 billion viewers. It required no caption, no commentary, no analysis, full stadium, empty stadium, one country that can cooperate with its neighbors, one that can't. International media adopted the framing immediately and relentlessly. A BBC correspondent standing outside a half-empty American venue with a packed Canadian fan zone visible on a screen behind her. This is what the trade war looks like when it reaches the one thing every country in the world cares about. A Japanese broadcaster running the split-screen footage with visible incredulity, the anchor pausing for 3 seconds before saying simply, "This is the United States of America." The hashtag Stolen Cup trended for the duration of the tournament. Millions of American fans directing their fury at FIFA when the actual cause was the trade war that made hosting impossible. The anger was real and raw and omnipresent on every social media platform. But it was misdirected, and misdirected anger is more politically dangerous than targeted anger because it searches for a target, bounces between explanations, and eventually lands on the one that fits. For millions of Americans, the landing was the same. This happened because of the trade war, and the trade war happened because of the people who started it. The soft power inversion was total. The World Cup is the single largest soft power event on earth. Hosting it broadcasts to 5 billion people that your country is open, functional, welcoming, and globally connected. Losing it broadcasts the opposite, that your country is isolated, dysfunctional, and unable to maintain functional relationships with the nations that share its borders. The United States spent 4 years and billions of dollars preparing to broadcast the first message. It broadcast the second instead, and the broadcast lasted a month, played on every screen on earth, and cannot be unseen. Meanwhile, across both borders, the money arrived, and it arrived at a scale that transformed cities overnight. Toronto became the tournament's North American showpiece, hosting knockout matches that drew the world's best teams, the highest spending international fans, and the global media spotlight that host cities leverage for decades of tourism marketing. Hotel occupancy reached 100% for the duration of the city's hosting window. Restaurants, bars, and entertainment venues along the waterfront reported revenue at 4 to 5 times normal levels. The fan zone at Exhibition Place drew 300,000 visitors over 10 days. Japanese fans, South Korean fans, British fans, Brazilian fans. The global football diaspora that would have traveled to American cities traveled to Toronto instead, spending money that American businesses had already counted on. Vancouver absorbed the Pacific Rim fan contingent that was supposed to go to Seattle and San Francisco. Australian, Japanese, South Korean supporters whose spending flowed through Canadian hotels, Canadian restaurants, Canadian transportation instead. Edmonton, the smallest of the Canadian host cities, experienced what its mayor described as the single greatest economic event in this city's history, as group stage and round of 16 matches brought international visitors at volumes the city had never experienced, and Mexico City hosted the final. 2 billion viewers watching the World Cup trophy lifted at Estadio Azteca for the third time in history, a moment that cemented Mexico City's status as the spiritual capital of world football and generated an economic and cultural impact that will reverberate through the city's tourism, hospitality, and global brand for decades. Guadalajara and Monterrey absorbed the remaining Mexican matches with the energy and infrastructure of a nation that treats football as its national religion, and that had been preparing to welcome the world with the passion that only a Mexican World Cup can produce. Canada's total World Cup economic impact was projected at $13.4 billion. Mexico is at $17.1 billion. Combined, over $30 billion in economic activity that was supposed to happen in the United States, redirected, absorbed, and celebrated by the two nations that the trade war was supposed to bring to heel. Warren Buffett addressed it, and his analysis went beyond economics to something most trade strategists never think to quantify, because until now it had never been priced. There are two kinds of economic value in the world, Buffett said. Transactional value, the value you can measure in dollars and contracts and trade flows. And relational value, the value that comes from being the kind of country other nations want to work with, host events with, build partnerships with, celebrate with. That relational value, call it soft power, call it goodwill, call it the economic benefit of being in Babel, has never had a price tag. Trade economists don't model it. GDP calculations don't capture it. But it is real. It is enormous. And it is, as we just learned, worth at least $39 billion. Because that is what the United States just lost by becoming the country that can't cooperate with its neighbors well enough to host a soccer tournament. He applied the principle with the precision of someone who has watched relational value compound and deteriorate across 7 decades of business. I've watched companies lose their best partnerships, not because they were out-competited, but because they were unpleasant to work with. The product was still good. The price was still competitive, but the partner across the table had been conditioned through threats, through broken commitments, through unpredictability, to dread every interaction. And when a better option appeared, not a bigger partner, just a more reliable one, a more cooperative one, the switch was instant. For most of my life, I've watched how relationships shape outcomes in business. The numbers matter, of course. We measure revenue, we model costs, we calculate margins. But the most valuable asset a company or a country can have rarely appears on a balance sheet. It's trust. It's the willingness of others to work with you. When people enjoy doing business with you, opportunities show up. When they don't, those opportunities quietly go somewhere else. That's the lesson sitting underneath this whole World Cup story. You can calculate the cost of a tariff. You can estimate the impact of a disrupted supply chain. Economists are very good at building models that tell you what a trade dispute might cost in dollars. But there's another category of value that's much harder to measure. I'd call it relational capital. It's the economic benefit that comes from being the kind of partner others want to cooperate with. When that capital erodes, the losses don't arrive on a neat spreadsheet. They show up in moments like this. For a month, billions of people watched a global event that was supposed to showcase American hospitality and organization. Instead, they watched something very different. Packed stadiums in neighboring countries and half-empty venues in places that had spent years preparing for the celebration. That image carries a message.